Hey, Warcraft fans, Eldorian here from BlizzPlanet.com. Today I'm interviewing a very special guest that I'm very excited to interview, and I think this is a BlizzPlanet first interviewing him. He's the man, the legend, and the guy who can get over 9,000 Twitter followers overnight, lead systems designer Greg Street, which several of you know as GhostCrawler. Hey, Greg, how's it going?
Hey, it's going really well. We are so close to launching this, which is just a very exciting and relieving place to be.
Yeah, I bet. I know I'm really excited myself. I'm ready to go next Tuesday. We have several questions here that some of our community has brought to our attention, and some of them are my own. So we'll just go ahead and jump right in here. We all know that you came to Blizzard after being a successful RTS designer with Age of Empires. What are some of your top rules or guidelines as game design that remain true throughout your work in WoW, and how have they influenced the current game?
Sure. I'll say one of them is that there's not one set of balance numbers that works for all players. Balance for hardcore players can be very different from balance from mid-level or very new players. We found that on the RTS games, for example, with chariot archers, which are fast-moving ranged units. If you can micro them, you are really, really good. If you can't micro them, you're terrible and they're a useless unit for you. And I find the same thing is true in World of Warcraft. We've had issues like in PvP, mages at the high end are fairly well balanced, but mages in the mid tiers are very hard for less experienced players to counter. Whereas we kind of have the opposite problem with hunters, where they're really, really good at the high end, but it takes a super skilled player to pull that off, kind of like with the chariot archers.
Yeah, is there anything that you've learned from joining Blizzard that you have changed your stance on as far as game design goes?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot. One of the things that I learned, particularly from my boss, Tom Chilton, is that the most elegant game design is not always the best. I think we have a tendency to try to come up with, like, the simple, most pure design. But it doesn't always work for a game as complicated and with such a huge, diverse player base as World of Warcraft. So that's where you end up with things like, we have 3 difficulty levels now in raiding, which is not very elegant, but really helps to deliver content to players at all skill levels.
So, jumping back to Cataclysm and previous expansions, I believe you started with Wrath of the Lich King, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I was here for Sunwell, so I missed the Burning Crusade launch, but I was there for the patches.
Okay, so you started midway through Burning Crusade. What are some things that didn't work out so well from your days of Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, Cataclysm, that you're looking to possibly change with Mists of Pandaria?
I think early on, WoW, like many MMOs, was a very grindy game. And to get, say, Grand Marshal, you had to just put in hours and hours of time. And to complete a raid like AQ40, is a huge commitment. And as the game started aging, and as, frankly, many of us started getting older and our player base shifted demographics a little bit, we started to look at, well, how can we let players keep playing the game but not ask as much of them? Less of a time commitment, which was, super noble on our part. But where it ended up is we had players who said, dude, I've finished everything I can think of doing in World of Warcraft, and I really want to play more, but there's nothing else left for me to do. I've maxed everything out. So, I'm going to go play another game or something. So I think in retrospect, we needed to provide more things for players to do. We try to hit it to where, like, in 10% of the time you can complete 50% of the content, but then there's still plenty of content for you to do if you want to play more. So that's why we shifted away from things like having a cap on daily quests and having such a tight cap on Valor, as we wanted to give players a lot more flexibility in what they did so that we would never hear someone say, man, I want to play WoW tonight, but there's just nothing to do.
Yeah, and that kind of leads me into the next question, is like one of the things that I didn't personally like about Cataclysm is we get to the final patch, and then that was sitting there for a very long time before this next expansion gets hit. What are some things that you're, like, do you have any plans on fixing that with Mists, and, what are those things that you're planning on doing?
We had planned, it's probably obvious, but we had planned to ship Mists earlier. And then, the 4.3 Dragon Soul patch lasted so long because, hey, look, it's a new expansion coming out. But at the same time, we're Blizzard and we have a commitment to quality, and we have a lot of players that would have been disappointed by a half-assed expansion. So we had to look at some things really hard and go back and fix them. We added more raid bosses. We redid the entire Jade Forest questing experience because it just wasn't good enough. We worked extra hard on things like the challenge mode armor, so that delayed when the expansion came out. We're actually in one of the better places we've ever been in terms of we're making a lot of progress on the 5.1 and 5.2 patches already. Normally there would have been like a break, everyone would have practically killed themselves getting 5.0 out the door and then, gone on vacation, stayed home and played the game a lot, and we wouldn't have started the next patches. But, I don't think it's leaking anything to say the 5.2 Druid Raid armor and the Warrior PvP armor are already done and in the bag. So we've got a pretty good head start on the next big tier already.
It seems that some fans in general like to kind of romanticize about some of the classes that currently, for example, aren't able to tank to be able to tank. For example, the popular ones seem to be Warlocks and Shamans. Have you guys thought about, well, first of all, with the new talent system, it looks like new specs could easily be added. For example, we have the Druids with 4 specs now. Is this something that you guys have thought about possibly doing down the road on adding more specs to some classes, maybe making a pure DPS class, give them maybe a spec for healing or tanking?
Yeah, that topic comes up all the time. I think the question is, can the class support it in terms of like how many new abilities would we have to add to make a shaman tank? And then, is that manageable? Does it bloat the spellbook? Does it make it to where players no longer understand what a shaman's about because they do so many different things? But I think it's a kind of a cool way to expand what classes do for someone who's maybe bored with their warlock. Having a warlock tank gives them something kind of, an exciting reason to pick that class up again. So I have no idea if we'll do it, but it is something we've talked about.
I'm curious about the thought process and the discussion that goes on when you're adding and changing systems and how they might work in future expansions. For example, we have the new system of talents again. You get one about every 15 levels. Have you given any thought on what happens when the next expansion rolls around? I mean, are we going to have to get an additional 15 levels, or are you going to just go 5 levels? How is that going to expand beyond this expansion?
So there's a couple of ways to answer that. One is, I think the talent system could just support another row or another column, if that's the right call. When you look at a class like the Priest is probably the hardest talent system to design because there's 2 healing specs and 1 damage spec. So we asked ourselves, maybe it makes sense to not have 1 talent system for the Priest. Maybe the Priest needs 2, and the healers go with 1, the damage dealer goes with another one. So that's another way to expand it. But then a totally different way to answer the question is, our expansions so far have always been about adding on more levels and more levels, but I don't think anyone wants to see World of Warcraft with like 160 or 180 character levels. That just seems ridiculous. So I don't know that we can just keep tacking on levels to the end and having, now you have 25 pages of spells and you have 24 cooldowns on your bar. It's just, we're going to reach a point where we can't just keep expanding that, the character space.
So we now have account-wide pets, mounts, and achievements. Going forward, what do you think is a criteria for if you would make something account-wide or not? For example, will we ever see heirloom items become fully account-wide across server and faction?
Yeah, I would love to see that. I can't promise we'll do it, but I think it's kind of a failure of game systems whenever players have to mail their own characters anything. I think mail should be something exciting. When you see that little icon come up, it should be like, ooh, what did I get for mail? Not, oh, it was my alt sending my heirlooms back. It fits the kit of like, oh, this is, this breastplate has been in the family for years and we pass it down from father to son. But it's such a hassle to, to come back and level a character for Mist and be like, oh, which character had the shoulders? Where's that staff again? I mean, that's not a lot of fun. So I think heirlooms would be a great thing to integrate into some kind of account level system. I'd say the biggest criteria is just anytime you're playing one character instead of the character you'd rather be playing because of some account level feature, I think that's when it gets in the way. And that's definitely what we saw with the achievements, where players who had 9,000 or 10,000 achievement points wouldn't want to play an alt because, what if there was an opportunity to get a new achievement on their main and they weren't playing their main at that time? That was one of the biggest motivators to do it. Alts have always been really important.
On the flip side of that, with the account-wide achievements, how are holiday events going to be made interesting for all characters? Because now, on all my characters, I have, all of the holiday achievements. When Halloween rolls around, what's my incentive to want to do the Halloween event?
I mean, one answer is maybe there isn't one. I'm not sure it was super fun for the guy with 6 alts to feel like, okay, I just got Hollow's Eve. Now I got to get it on my Dwarf Paladin. Now I've got to get it on my Mage. You know, playing through content over and over again, it can get dull. Now you can take that to the extreme and say, oh, I shouldn't have to level my alts. All of my alts should be level 90, and they should all have Valor gear and everything, and then you're not really playing your alts at all. So I think there's a sweet spot in between playing an alt actually gives you something else fun to do without it being as painful or as requiring the time commitment that it took to level your main to begin with.
Now moving on to challenge modes, they look like something that a lot of hardcore players are going to love. How will current challenge modes work for the current dungeons when they're no longer the highest tier and people are over-geared for them? Do you plan on removing those challenge modes, or do you plan on just keeping them there and letting people down the road years from now still compete for them?
So you can't actually overgear a challenge mode, because when you step into a challenge mode, it lowers the item level on all your gear down to a preset level. So earning more gear...
I didn't know that.
Yeah, earning more gear won't actually allow you to overpower it. The way we say is that you have to outskill it, you can't outgear it. So that will let us keep this content relevant as long as players are interested, and gives us a lot of ability to go look at other dungeons and say, hey, is it time we add a challenge mode to Oldemon or to Stratholme or Dire Maul or some other player favorite?
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask. I mean, with that kind of system, is there any plans to go back and add them to the older dungeons?
There's a lot of interest on the team to do that. We just have to see, we want to make sure players are excited about challenge modes as we are.
Yeah, and then then you can go back and do that, and I think that would add a ton of content down the road. I know that would make me excited to do the old dungeons again. So we got our first look at scenarios on the live realms yesterday with the Fall of Theramore, and so far reactions kind of seem to be mixed. I personally love the scenario idea, but I kind of felt that this one fell a little short in expectations, and for a few various reasons. I think people were excited for a world event and didn't get one. What feedback have you been getting about it so far, and is there anything that you'd like to respond to that feedback?
Yeah, I think you're totally right that some players were just expecting a world event. They wanted a zombie invasion or something like that, and that's not what this was. This was, here's a sneak peek at what scenarios are going to be like, because we felt like it was the kind of thing you had to experience to really get it. They're intended to be fairly fast. They're intended to not require certain comps. You don't need a tank or a healer, so you can just get, a couple of your friends and go run them. They're designed to be repeatable. They have some amount of randomization in the content, so you're not seeing the same thing all the time. It's probably hard just playing one scenario and imagining what it'll feel like when you have multiple ones to try out. I think I think the level 85 Theramore shipped a little easy, and we already have increased the health of the opponents. We weren't sure exactly what kind of players would be playing it. It ends up that it's a lot of Dragon Soul gear players, so they, scenarios don't scale your gear down, and they've been able to trivialize the content a little bit. At 90, we balanced it around the kind of gear players will have at 90, so I think it'll feel a little more challenging at that point. I've also heard a lot of players that want more storytelling, and that's a really hard thing to handle. Yeah, storytelling is awesome the first time you run a dungeon, and then you want to skip through it every other time. So we have to be careful not to put in too much okay, everyone, I'm going to sit here and listen to Jaina talk for a while. You guys go on or wait and give me a hard time because I'm slowing you down.
One of the things I would have liked to have seen was dialogue during the fights, and then maybe one little cutscene that kind of explains a little bit that only runs once, the one time that you ran it, and then you can go back. I think similar to the Wrathgate.
Yeah, if it only ran once, or if it was something you could skip through, like what we saw in Dragon Soul is players would watch Thrall fight Deathwing the first time, or maybe not even the first time. They'd eventually get around to watching it, but that way you don't have to watch it every time and slow the whole group down. So
moving on, I only have a couple more things left, but we were talking about the world event, and what was the reason behind not having a world event this time around? It was something that a lot of players really enjoyed in the past, and they seem a little disappointed this time around.
Yes, it's really interesting to see the feedback, because I wouldn't have predicted players would have missed them much at all based on our previous ones. It was something that some players would try out, but we always got mixed feedback too of this isn't awesome enough, or we didn't put the kind of effort into the world events that we put into, say, a new zone or a new dungeon. So I think they always felt a little small from a design standpoint. There wasn't much meat there, and we didn't want to spend the resources on something kind of half-assed when we could on content that would last only a couple of weeks, when we could spend that same energy on making the Pandarian experience that much more fun. So it's kind of funny that now that they're gone, players really, really miss world events, and maybe that means next time we'll do one, but we'll try to make it big and splashy.
What is the one thing added to Pandaria that you are most proud of, and why?
I thought a lot about how to answer this question. I would say from a systems design standpoint, it's the talent trees, because it really gets at the heart of who your character is and what your character cares about. It not only gives you the customization that I talked about earlier, but it gives players a reason to, I'm a little bored running this raid that's on farm now, so I'm going to try this talent that I've never taken before and just kind of see how it feels at. So we think it adds a little bit of replayability, customization. It gives us some balance tools to be able to say, look, this can be really powerful because we know you can only have one of these three things. It's probably going to have the biggest lasting impact on the game long after players have moved on from Jade Forest to whatever our next continent is.
Well, cool. Well, thanks a lot for joining us and answering our questions for us. I'm sure that the fans are going to love it.
No, I appreciate finally getting a chance to talk to you guys.
Thanks again, GhostCrawler and Blizzard Entertainment, for allowing us to do this interview. If you like this interview, please check out other interviews we have done recently. For instance, we interviewed Mickey Nielsen and Sean Galloway regarding the new graphic novel coming out next week titled Pearl of Pandaria. And we also have a great interview up with Christy Golden regarding her book Ties of War. Of course, also check out our weekly shows here on YouTube with The Bearded Gamer. We have Week of Warcraft, StarCraft Summary, and Diablo Dialogue. And don't forget to check out BlizzPlanet.com for all your news, reviews, fantastic community, all about Blizzard Entertainment games. Thanks for listening.